Good evening and welcome once again to the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University. We're pleased to see so many Brown students, faculty, alumni, and other interested people joining us tonight virtually. I'm Richard Arenberg, visiting professor of the practice of political science and a senior fellow at the Watson Institute. I'm honored to serve this year as Interim Director of the Taubman Center, which is a part of the Watson Institute. The Taubman Center seeks to impact American politics and policy through scholarship, public opinion polling, conferences, workshops, academic research, internships, and a robust series of speakers drawn from experts, the media, academia, think tanks, and public officials. This year, we have been placing special emphasis on the 2020 national elections and the events which have followed as a new administration and the nation grapple with issues of public health crisis, social justice, education, the economy, and commitment to the rule of law, with a roster of outstanding speakers and programs. Tonight, we present the 26th in our series of programs. We're honored to have as our special guest tonight, former six-term Senator from Michigan, Carl Levin. Senator Levin is running a few minutes late and will be joining us shortly. There is some possibility Senator Levin may have to leave before the very end of the program. We're joined tonight by the executive director of the Levin Center at Wayne State Law School, James Townsend. Jim will pinch hit later in the program. If necessary, we will discuss the mission of the Levin Center, and welcome to you, Jim. Senator Carl Levin is the longest serving senator in Michigan history. He was born in Detroit and earned his bachelor's degree in political science at Swarthmore and his law degree at Harvard. He served as the first general counsel for the Michigan Civil Rights Commission and later special assistant attorney general for the state of Michigan and chief appellate defender for the Legal Aid and Defenders Association of Detroit. In 1969, he was elected to the Detroit City Council, and in 1974 became the council president. This makes him the rare formal local official to serve in the Senate. He was elected to the United States Senate in 1978, defeating an incumbent, Senator Robert Griffin. In the Senate, he earned the respect and affection of many senators from both sides of the aisle. Known for his integrity and his tenacity, over his 36 years in the Senate, he became one of the body's most widely admired members. He rose to become chairman of the powerful Senate Armed Services Committee. He also chaired the Senate's foremost investigatory committee, the Permanent Senate Committee on Investigations, known as PSI. If I tried to list all of his legislative accomplishments, the list is so long I'd never get to the actual introduction of Senator Levin. He led the opposition to authorization of the Iraq War in 2003, authoring an alternative designed to give U.S. inspectors time to search for weapons of mass destruction. His older brother and best friend, Sandy Levin, was a member of the House of Representatives and chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. They served together for 32 years in the Congress, making them the longest serving siblings in congressional history. Carl knows of my love of Senate trivia, so he wouldn't be surprised if I include a fact which I'm sure he's not heard in a previous introduction. In his 36 years, he cast 12,630 votes, only 180 votes fewer than President Joe Biden cast in the Senate. This places Carl Levin in the top 15 senators in the history of the U.S. Senate. His new book, a great read, by the way, is titled Carl Levin, Getting to the Heart of the Matter, My 36 Years in the Senate, and I'll try to show it to you here, maybe not all that successfully, but go out and find it. It's a great read, as I say. He and his wife, Barbara, live in Detroit. They have 3 daughters and 6 grandchildren. His new book, as I said, is Getting to the Heart of the Matter. My conversation with Senator Levin tonight will last for approximately a half hour, after which we will take questions from the audience. You may enter questions through the Q&A function, which will be viewable to me. You may begin entering questions if you have them already, beginning now and throughout the program. Please keep them short and to the point. I will convey as many of these questions to the senator as we have time for. This event is being recorded for later viewing, available on the Taubman Center website or the Watson Institute website. It is also being live streamed on YouTube. And I see that Senator Levin has joined us actually right on time. He managed to miss my introduction, but no harm there. So now it's with great honor for me, to introduce my friend and former boss. In the words of our senator here in Rhode Island, Jack Reed, he is an American hero. Senator Carl Levin, welcome to Brown, Carl.
I can try.
Yeah.
I can just hold it.
Hey, Rich, good to be with you and Jim Townsend, who's the director of the Levin Center at Wayne State Law School, who is joining us, and he may signal me if I put my foot in my mouth too many times, but he also will take over when I have to leave. I guess all I can say.
Okay, well,
A great program going. You were
yes.
a member of our staff. You know, you were invaluable. You have continued to be of huge value to the nation in your writing, your teaching. So I want to just thank you for all your service.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. Senator, by all accounts, the Senate is a very different place than it was when you arrived in 1979. As long ago as 1985, former Majority Leader Robert Byrd asked, have civility and common courtesy and reasonableness taken leave of the Senate? He was complaining about Senator Connie Mack, saying that Democrats lack the guts to negotiate differences over the budget, and complaining about Rick Santorum, accusing Bill Clinton of bald-faced untruths. That all seems pretty tame by the current standards of political discourse. Byrd went on to say, little did I know when I came here that I would live to see pygmies stride like colossus. Now, I don't expect you to call any senators pygmies, but where have all the giants gone?
Where is what?
Where have all the giants gone?
Well, there's some great senators there now. Because of the divisiveness, it's kind of hard for them to put together the kind of coalitions that requires leadership that's so essential for legislation. But I just don't want to name who the giants are, because I'd leave out some who probably my best friends. And, but I don't want to either tell you who the real disappointments are that are not living up to what should be the Senate's great tradition. So there's always, there's some of both kinds. I think, though, that the divisiveness in the country, which has been spawned and increased recently by President Trump, that divisiveness has made it harder, I think, for senators to take positions which will not lead to their own defeat. In other words, because there's such a hardcore base, particularly in the Republican Party, with the excesses that Trump went to create that base and to keep them whipped up. I just think that it's that more than anything else is the cause, but they're still there, and we should try to see if we can't do everything we can to promote the kind of bipartisanship, which is something that involves courage these days, because of the base being so strongly speaking out.
In your book, which I've already mentioned is a great read, you call the decision by President George W. Bush to go to war with Iraq the most misguided strategic decision of our government that you witnessed in your 36 years in the Senate. You led the fight to defeat the resolution in Congress to authorize the invasion of Iraq. How did you come to that decision? And looking back, what lessons have you drawn from the Iraq War?
Well, the reason I voted against it was that the facts that we delved into so thoroughly before going to war simply did not justify an attack on Iraq. They were led by a horrific dictator. So are a number of other countries. But you got to be darn sure that if you're going to move against a dictator, that you don't create a situation which is also bad. And our move in without any international support is something which is precipitated not a more peaceful Middle East by any stretch of the imagination, but a more conflicted Middle East. And that was triggered by the second George Bush decision to attack Iraq.
The Senate Armed Services Committee that you chaired is typically among the most bipartisan committees in the Senate. Does bipartisanship in the Senate, or at least the ability to work across the aisle, still matter?
It matters a lot, but I'd like to expand a bit on my answer to the.
Oh, sure, please do.
I said that the president misled us into that war, and he did in a number of ways. He was able to persuade using, I believe, false and inaccurate information and statements of his. He was able to persuade the majority of the American people that Iraq and their leader, Saddam Hussein, had participated in the 9/11 attack on us. Now, he did this in various ways. And it's a complicated story, but maybe I should take a few minutes and expand on it, because once I call it the worst strategic decision, I think I should give full
Justify it.
For that conclusion. Most people believed in something which the intelligence community itself did not believe. That was the deceptive part. For a president who has full access to the CIA's intelligence to say that there was a connection between those people who attacked us on 9/11 and Saddam Hussein is a huge deception. I knew it was false. I spoke out on the floor saying that the evidence they were using for that was false evidence. It was something that should never happen. The evidence that, for instance, they were using was that there was a meeting between the top intelligence guy for Saddam Hussein and the attackers on 9/11, the meeting they said that took place in Prague. It didn't. The people in the Czech Republic who ran intelligence came to tell us that the meeting that they are using by the administration as evidence did not take place. They were telling us, the people in Prague, our allies, don't say that because it's not true. And yet, the administration, not just the president, but Cheney as well, perhaps of all making the most extreme statements. For the people of the United States to believe something and base it as a decision to go to war on that has a huge, huge impact. And it's wrong. It was wrong at the time. And we go into great deal of detail in the book to show in many ways how it was wrong. As to whether Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, he did not. The UN was involved in inspections, which would have shown that he did not. We cut off those inspections. We actually stopped the UN from continuing to send in the inspectors so that they could show what was there, or more significantly, what wasn't there. I want to just cite one more example. The president in one of his State of the Union messages said that there was that the British have learned that Iraq is seeking fissile material, nuclear material for a nuclear weapon. And the President of the United States, in the most watched speech of all, a State of the Union message, said something that simply was not believed by his intelligence community. And that's the following. When he said that the British have learned something, the implication is that we agree with that. They're close allies, and that we are likely to believe it, that, if he says it that way, that the people have got to believe that the president believes what he's saying the British believe. But we did not believe it. Our own intelligence community did not believe that what the British had learned was accurate. We did not believe he was seeking uranium in Africa. And yet the president says something which clearly implies that we did believe something that would threaten us because it would lead to a nuclear weapon. And for him to say that is just right. Technically, he's accurate. Mm-hmm. The British believed it. So he says the British believe. Yeah. But my gosh, if we don't believe it, how can he possibly create that impression to create something, a belief in the American people in something that is not true? So that's just part of the story, a lot longer than maybe time permits. A lot of it's laid out in the book, by the way, that you made reference to, my memoir.
So let me ask you again about bipartisanship and the importance of it. Not only in the Senate, but I think in our democracy.
Yeah, if you want to get something done in a legislative setting, You've got to work with people of different backgrounds, different racial and ethnic origins, different kinds of political beliefs. You've got to work with people if you want to accomplish something, because this is an extraordinarily diverse democracy, and our legislative bodies, for the most part, reflect that diversity. And so if you want to legislate, if you want to accomplish an important goal, whether it's for the nation, for a state, or for a city, whatever, if you want to get something done, you're going to have to work with people of different beliefs and backgrounds. And that's what bipartisanship is all about. It's all about trying to get something done.
In a somewhat related question, progressive Democrats are pushing very hard right now for the elimination of the filibuster. They're arguing that the Democratic agenda will otherwise be thwarted by the need to get votes to end a filibuster. When Democratic, I should have said to get 60 votes to end a filibuster. When Democratic Majority Leader Harry Reid used the parliamentary ploy back in 2013, called the nuclear option to kill the filibuster on judicial nominations, you were one of only 3 Democrats who voted no. How do you see the issue of filibuster reform now?
Well, I'm afraid this is a long answer, but you've written a longer book on this subject. So
Fair enough.
Yeah. If you can figure out a way to answer this in 3 minutes or less, let me know. At any rate, I believe that the progressive agenda is an important agenda. I agree with most of it. And if it's important, which it is, it's got to fight to get it adopted. It's not the filibuster which is standing in the way of the adoption of the or most parts of the progressive agenda. It's not the filibuster. It's the threat of a filibuster. And that threat should not succeed. It shouldn't be allowed to succeed by the opponents of the progressive agenda. And to get that agenda adopted, you've got to be willing to stand up and fight. And that means using the rules of the Senate, making the filibusters filibuster, actually stand on the floor day after day, 24/7. Okay? It may be inconvenience to an extent for those who oppose what they're trying to do, oppose the filibuster, want the program adopted. There's inconvenience for them too. You know, there's soccer games that they're going to miss. There's weekends they can't go home. But that's what fighting is all about. If you can't fight for what you believe in, then you're not really believing in it enough to do what might help it get achieved. And what the Democrats need to do in the Senate is to do what is rarely done because people cave into their own conveniences. What's rarely done, make the filibusters stand up and talk. And most bills that are defeated or pulled down and not adopted purely because there's a threat to filibuster. Okay, most of those bills aren't going to pass anyway. You know, if they're that weak that there's no support for them, that they're just going to be dropped out. That's true at most quantitatively of the bills. But the major issues, there are major issues which also have not passed in this country because people who support those issues are not willing to make the filibusters stand up and support them. I've seen that over and over again in the Senate. I don't know of the number of times when there's a hold on a bill. The opponent of a bill puts a hold on it. which is theoretically a threat to filibuster. And then it's up to the majority leader, whether or not, it's his decision, whether or not to bring that bill to the floor for debate. And so when it's the majority leader who decides not to proceed, it's not the filibuster's presence, it's the majority leader's decision as to how to allocate time and how hard his caucus wants to fight to get something accomplished.
He could end these holds tomorrow morning simply by announcing he was no longer going to honor them.
Yeah, it's that simple. It's complicated maybe politically.
Yes.
You know, he may have some people in his caucus who are angry that their hold isn't going to work. And there'd be in the other caucus a lot more people who would be unhappy that they have to come and talk. They can't just say what I'm going to do and threaten to do something. They've got to be forced to put their money where their mouth is.
It appears the president's under a lot of pressure on this issue right now.
It is. But again, I think it's not the way to get the agenda adopted, either in whole or in part. It only deepens, if you can, divisiveness and the lack of bipartisanship that's presently the case.
Now, you also chaired the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I should tell our audience is a powerful subcommittee of the Homeland Security Committee. The subcommittee has no legislative jurisdiction, but is able to carry out wide-ranging investigations into government programs and wrongdoing in the private sector as well. It's unique in that the subcommittee chairman can issue subpoenas without going back to the full committee for approval. You led many investigations over the course of your career into Enron, offshore tax havens, the 2008 financial crisis, money laundering, executive pay, to name just a few of them. Many led to legislation moving through other committees which had the legislative jurisdiction and/or had great influence in triggering changes. Which investigations stand out to you as the most important?
Well, I'd pick one probably in the governmental oversight issue, and then another one in the more private sector issue. Before I do that, I want to put a plug in for a book that my chief of staff at PSI wrote called Financial Exposure. Her name is Elise Bean. It's a whole book on our investigations at Permanent Subcommittee. And there's one chapter, a long chapter in my memoir on the subject as well. But in terms of your question, I say the one that's probably the most, has been the most visible, has got the most hits, as they might say, on some media or other, was the investigation into the financial collapse in 2008. To pick just one example of that example, it was when Goldman Sachs sold bonds that they had put together, financial instruments which were based on mortgages, which were bad, faulty mortgages. And they knew it. They knew it because their staff described the bonds that they were selling to their own customers as crap. Now just imagine a major investment company that people depend upon for advice, selling knowingly financial instruments which they thought would fail because the security upon which they were based was faulty security, and they knew it. It was crappy security. We had 4 long hearings after a year and a half investigation into the financial collapse. And the 4th hearing was into Goldman Sachs's behavior. The other example I would use had to do with the decision of our most profitable corporations to hide their income, their profits, and to send their pieces of their corporate structure offshore to collect the revenues. We had a hearing with Apple, showed what they had done to create a fiction that they were really operating in other places when all they were doing was collecting revenues from around the world in those so-called tax havens. So for us to allow companies like this particular company, Apple, but there's others as well, the major new companies out of Silicon Valley who are making huge profits and paying little or no taxes, is wrong. It's wrong for the rest of Americans who do pay their taxes to have to, in effect, make up for the shortfalls which are created when our major, most profitable companies are not paying a fair share, avoiding it by the use of transferring intellectual property to tax havens. That was a very important hearing, led to some heavy fines, but that that hasn't changed the situation.
There's also a big section of a chapter in your book about the Clinton impeachment, the Senate trial. And I remember as we were going through it, I mean, little did we know that we would see 2 additional Senate impeachment trials in just the next few years. But you write in the book that you told your colleagues during the Clinton Senate trial that the president's conduct was reprehensible and that he had the duty to tell the truth. You voted in the end to acquit the president. How difficult was that decision to come to? And looking back on it, how did the trial and verdict differ from the 2 Trump trials?
Well, in Clinton's case, what he did is not an impeachable offense. He lied, putting aside the technical question as to whether it was perjury legally or not. But nonetheless, he lied about whether he had a sexual relationship with Monica Lewinsky. And lying about an affair which is voluntary, reprehensible, but voluntary on the part of both of them is very different from what Trump did, which is to, I believe, threaten the security of the Congress and this country, thereby make an attack on democracy and democratic behavior and values. And in doing so, not just establish something which is totally unacceptable in a democracy, which is a threat, physical threat to our legislative body, but he also made a statement to the world in doing so that it was very supportive, basically, of the dictators around the world, including some now new leaders in Europe who engage in anti-democratic practices. It gives them support in an anti-democratic trend around the world. Our country's going to survive. In fact, I think we'll be stronger because we will have stood up to the kind of fanatics which attacked the Capitol. I think we're going to end up that being viewed as a time where we came through our democracy and our democratic values. So I'm not worried about us, but I am worried about the message it sends about us and about democratic values, which are not only important here, but they're important in other places around the world too.
In the run-up to the 2020 election last year, there was a lot of talk amongst Democrats about expanding the Supreme Court as a way of balancing it ideologically. What's your view of this?
I think it's a mistake, and we just, it's not going to happen, by the way. It would take a change in statutes for it to happen, but it shouldn't happen. It's, we depend upon an independent court system. And I think for us to deal with it as though it's a political issue is a mistake. And the federal courts have been an absolute bulwark against efforts to eliminate democratic values in this country. And over again, they have come through. It took them a long time with school segregation, obviously. There was a terrible opinion in the late 1800s, which protected segregation. And so it took finally, though, a Supreme Court opinion to tell the states they can't do it anymore. They had to adopt an anti-states' rights, so-called, decision, make it part of the Constitution. So I have a lot of confidence overall in the court system, and they did a tremendous job, I believe. Not every court decision, obviously, not every Supreme Court decision, although there were a lot of good ones, but they were the bulwark against a lot of Trump mischief. And we can give them credit, I believe, and a lot of lower courts, even more than the Supreme Court, for standing up to the Trump excesses.
We've got a large audience out there, and some of them are anxious to ask their questions. And so let me read a couple of questions from the audience. And it's testimony. We already talked about the filibuster. It's testimony to how hot that issue is right now, that as I look at about the first eight questions or so, about 6 of them are about the filibuster and whether it should be killed. So, but we've covered that. Janet asks, of which of your Senate votes are you the proudest and why?
I probably would say the vote against going to war in Iraq, for the reasons I've
You've explained it right.
There's no more important vote than war, whether to go to war. So I'd have to say that that's the most important vote, to oppose that war, which I think was a mistake.
Well, as someone who watched you vote many times for many years, I'm wondering, is there any vote in all those years that you regret having cast?
Oh, there's a number of them probably, if I wanted to spend the time. Not spending time with you here, but going back and making a good count. But one that has always stood out in my mind is the vote against the confirmation of Edward Koop. I think it was Everett Koop, actually.
Right.
Surgeon
General.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess he had the wrong position on some issue that I differed with him on. I think it was probably on the abortion issue, although I'm not 100% sure. but he was a terrific Surgeon General. And on tobacco, he made huge strides to show tobacco for what it is, basically a dangerous substance. But there was I'd say another vote actually was a vote not to go to war.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I think that the first President Bush,
Mhm.
the way he did the way he handled the war to push Iraq out of Kuwait, its neighbor that it had invaded, and he had broad international support to do what he did, and he pushed the Iraqi army out of Kuwait, did it major damage on the way out, but then did not invade Iraq. In other words, unlike his son, who invaded Iraq, and with all the consequences
Yeah.
that resulted, the first George Bush, when he went after the Iraqi army for their aggression against their neighbor, he was wise enough to stop at that point. And it may be because of his own personal war experience. I find that the people, the leaders particularly, who have gone to war are much more cautious than some of the leaders about the use of force, than many of the leaders who have never gone to war. And the one who've gone to war and seen the price that is paid to go to war, you gotta exert real care before you do it. And I think he did it, and I think I made a mistake in opposing it.
That's a very interesting answer. And, the Senate for many years been referred to as the world's greatest deliberative body. Doesn't always live up to that. But I always thought that the Senate debate over that first Gulf War was one of the high points in terms of Senate debates in recent years.
I agree. And I'm glad you called it the Gulf War, because it's known better by that term than it is the first Iraq War. But I agree. It was a lengthy debate. We had a pretty good debate on the recent Iraq War, what I call the second Iraq War. But, for all the reasons that I've outlined, it was a good debate in the Senate. We had opportunity to debate, which is one of the values of the filibuster, by the way.
Right.
It gives people a right to talk and to air issues, to bring home issues to the public. It's the only place where there can be a long debate. It's not subject to the majority will to cut off debate anytime it wants to, which is what they do in the House. You have a Rules Committee in the House. For many bills, they don't even allow any debate, no amendments. The Senate, because of the filibuster rule, you're allowed, and this is critical, to offer amendments. How important that is. But people who favor eliminating the filibuster sometimes don't realize that that's part and parcel of being able to offer amendments.
Sure, it's the linchpin. I think I will let a member of the audience, George, had a question about the filibuster, and he said he'd love to hear your view on the future of the filibuster. So just, kind of briefly, looking at your crystal ball, where do you think this is going?
Well, I think it ought to be reformed. And there's some key reforms that will limit the misuse, really, of the filibuster in two or three ways. And you ought to fill in the blanks that I inadvertently leave here, Rich. In one way, we should not allow a filibuster against what's called a motion to proceed to debate a bill.
Right.
Right now, you can, when the majority leader wants to proceed to a bill, to debate it, you can object. And if you object, and if you want to talk about it for a couple of days, you can delay the Senate for that length of time, and that affects what else can get done. So that
Yeah.
is an abuse which ought to be eliminated. It's easy to eliminate. In fact, we did it once, I think, a group of 6
Yes.
senators that got together in my hideaway. A bipartisan group, by the way, of 8 senators,
Right.
made this couple of suggestions for reducing the misuse of
We
the
did it for one session of Congress.
for that one. I
Right.
think it was once. You're right, one session.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's a very important reform. Another one is we should not allow the filibuster against a bill it's been adopted to go to conference with the House. Now, I think we've reduced the number of times you can filibuster a conference report. I think from 3 to 1. I'm not sure about that, but we've reduced the how often you can filibuster a conference-related issue, and that's another thing. There's a third one. There's another one that let's see, I can't remember. But people ought to buy your book. They can find out a lot of reforms that are in order to stop
Great.
the abuse of.
Thanks for the commercial.
Yeah, it's the threat of the filibuster. But again, that threat can be eliminated just by the majority leader ignoring it and saying, hey, we're bringing the bill to the floor. So that is
Right.
a major reform, is to enforce a rule that a threat, a hold be made public. But usually the people who want to filibuster bill, they want it to be known that they're the ones that are threatening a filibuster,
Right.
so that they can engage in negotiations. And by the way, one of the values, which we haven't talked about, of the filibuster is it does promote negotiations. And a lot of progress has been made simply because people on different sides of that issue are able to work it out because there's been a threat of a filibuster.
And it relates to what you were saying earlier about bipartisanship. It requires the parties to come to the table, because any majority needs some buy-in from the minority to get significant things done. So it fosters negotiation.
Absolutely.
The next question is from a former student of mine. He says, "Hi, Professor Arenberg. I took your course, The American Presidency. I want to ask whether Senator Levin ever considered running for president."
No.
That was
My wife Barbara may be listening, and I want her to reassure her. And she knows well. No, I to do that, you gotta be ambitious so totally that nothing else counts. And I couldn't, totally give myself to a political campaign for years, and also to fundraising, which is really, to me, so excessive in this, what's allowed mainly by a bad Supreme Court decision, what's allowed in terms of the almost unlimited funds that can now go into political campaigns. I never like to raise money, and that itself would be a big hindrance. But, Barb and I are too close to our wonderful 3 kids and 6 grandchildren for me to ruin the relationship by saying I'm going to say goodbye now for a couple of years, and I'm off on the campaign trail or raising money every night.
It's an old Washington joke that every senator gets up in the morning and sees a president in the mirror. And so I guess we've found one that doesn't.
Yeah, no, I'm either that, I don't have the right kind of mirror, or never.
This question is from a mutual friend of ours and a colleague of mine here at Brown, Jeff Robbins,
Oh, yeah.
who asks, When you reflect on the descent into particularly vitriolic partisanship in Congress in recent times, to what cause or causes do you attribute it?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow it. Try that again.
His question is, things are pretty vitriolic and partisan in the Congress these days. And he's asking what causes or what cause or causes you think that vitriol should be attributed to.
First of all, hello to Jeff, who's a dear friend and a great columnist too, by the way.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff. I think if you wanted to go back far enough, I guess, to the current situation, I'd attribute it to the beginning of it, probably to the emergence of the Tea Party, that really whose supporters took the position that they're not going to compromise. It's my way or the highway. And some of them would say, I didn't come here to Washington to compromise. Well, if you don't go to Washington to the Congress to compromise, if you want to get something done, that's not the way to do it. But if that's why you came to Washington, you should have stayed home. Because, you know, it's great for people to believe strongly in causes. I hope I do. But you got to believe enough in a cause that you want to get it achieved. You want to try to see if you can make progress towards achieving it, if you really believe in it. And that's why it seems to me that their whole philosophy, I thought, was extreme, but it's been carried on by a decision. Trump exacerbated it, another God knows how many multiples. But it didn't start with him. I hope it ends with him. Biden's a great conciliator. He, during his primary campaign, you know, some of his opponents were attacking him because he would work with people whose views in other respects are totally unacceptable. And so anyway, Biden's in the right position to, I believe, kind of turn this direction of vitriol and lack of willingness to work with others, to turn that around. He's the perfect president for it.
This one is from Sam, and it's a Detroit-centered question. And he asks, can you elaborate on the role of the 1967 rebellion on your decision to run for Common Council in 1969? What did you learn from 1967?
Well, our town was fractured. And a number of people came to me because of my background to try to help put the town together again. I had been the first general counsel to a newly created Michigan Civil Rights Commission in 1964, and, you know, including the Michigan Supreme Court, to try to prove the right to be free of discrimination in buying a house. So I had been active as their counsel for a couple of years. And then I went to the Defender's Office, which represents poor people, indigents. I was head of their appellate division, handled lots of appeals, including some people, at least, who were not only had a bad trial, we felt, but also were innocent, absolutely innocent. And so those two backgrounds, civil rights and representing people who could not afford counsel, was seen by a number of people as being very helpful to bring to the city council that needed people who would try to bring together the town. They felt I could get elected, and these supporters, because of that background, because we had always lived in Detroit. Barb and I, we lived in Detroit all our lives, except for, I guess, a few months maybe. And we believed in this city, and we've always lived here, where our kids went to school here. We've continued to maintain our home. This is where we live, downtown Detroit. And by the way, putting in a plug for Detroit, it's had an amazing comeback. But at any rate, I'd say that the people were persuasive that I could be helpful in bringing a sensitivity relative to race and relative to poverty.
Let me piggyback on that a little bit, because during the my introduction of you, during my introduction, in talking about your service in Detroit as president of the city council and so forth, I made the comment that made you one of the rare members of the Senate that had a deep background in local government. And the question I want to ask you is, how did that experience in local government, how did it inform your service as the United States Senator?
Well, in many ways, and I'm going to have to make this the last question.
Sure.
That's okay. First of all, I would say it made very vivid the importance of government programs, whether it's a housing program, a school program, infrastructure, whatever it is, water, sewer, the things you need really to have a good life. It drove home the importance of that to people, of those programs and their government programs here I'm talking about. So when the Tea Party comes along and is an anti-government party, they want to cut various programs so they can give a tax cut to wealthy folks. But at any rate, when that argument was made about, well, look how much waste there is in the particular program, I think, let's go after the waste, but don't go after the program. Don't go after the housing program, school program, whatever it is, because of the importance to humans, to people. And I could give example after example from having been an elected official in a town instead of in Washington. I could kind of drive home the importance of program. Secondly, I learned a lot about oversight, having to grill witnesses that come before you, listen carefully to answers so that you're really listening. You're not just being superficial, making statements, but you're addressing the answer to a question that's thrown to a bureaucrat. If they're not answering the question, why wasn't this service provided to this home on such and such a street? Well, if they weren't responding, I would know. But to know that a bureaucrat or witness is not being responsive, you got to know the details of the program and you got to listen. So I learned that. That really led into my decision to get involved in oversight when I got to Washington.
Well, we're just about out of time, Senator, and I want to thank you so much, Carl, for joining us tonight. Really for a great program, and as I like to say at the end of these virtual Zoom sessions. You know, I wish we could see the audience and hear them, because I'm sure you're getting a standing ovation right about at this
Yeah,
point.
no, I can imagine them all standing out there in front of their TVs. I can see them now. But anyway, great being with you. And I want to just thank Jim also for standing by.
Thanks, Jim, for spending this hour in the on-deck circle.
I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. Thank you.
And thank you to our